All right, well, welcome back, everybody. I think we'll get started here. I have a few presentations to give you. I promise not to speak too long here. I have a lot of slides here. I'm going to make the slides available afterwards. A lot of these are like really deep dives into these topics, but I don't want to get too much into them tonight. So, but I just want to talk about a few items that have changed largely since we've come back from the semester here. So many of you have noticed, probably some surprisingly, that D2L has changed over the summer, and we have what we call the new daylight interface. And I can explain a lot of the logic behind that, why we did this switch and so forth. The long and short of it is that D2L is going to make us do it anyway. So we waited basically as long as we could to roll this out, just so that it had a lot of time to mature, because the first iterations of the interface were really, quite frankly, very terrible. And was not working well. But the whole impetus for this was so that D2L would have a response to mobile devices. Just to give you an idea of how far behind they were, D2L's partner on mobile devices was BlackBerry. And so once BlackBerry folded in the rise of the iPhone and Android devices, they really had no response to mobile. And if you'd ever accessed D2L on a mobile device, you'd know how terrible it was to do that. You really couldn't do much on it. Many of the tools, frankly, just didn't even work on it. Was there a question? I saw something pop up. And Joe? Was there a question? I just want to, and hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Okay, perfect, thank you. So yeah, the interface was really terrible. You really couldn't use it to do a whole lot, so students were frustrated. D2L was like, well, we'll just build an app for everything. So here's an app for this tool, and here's an app for that tool, and so students had to have like 3 apps just to manage the course, and we're like, okay, you guys got to really do something better than this. So this was their response. So we were happy about this because the end result is that Daylight is a much better experience on mobile devices, and I probably won't show you just for the sake of time, but if you're ever curious, just load up D2L on your mobile phone now and see how much better it is. You can actually do things like discussions now, and you can actually participate in the tools. You can even take a quiz now if you want to do that as well. So that's kind of why they were going through and doing that. The initial template, even the one that we went to this summer, was actually fairly bland. They made a very subtle change in the last iteration of it that provides a little bit more separation for the widgets, so I think that's nicer. One of the problems that we're running into is that the fonts are really large. So if you've experienced that, especially if you go into your grades and you have like 30 students, it's really hard to see a lot of what's going on there. So one of the common complaints about that is the font sizes are too big, and so one of the things they are going to work on is the ability to change that a little bit. But short of that, we don't have a lot of control over the interface. Part of that is for accessibility reasons as well. One of the reasons I switched to the white background and the dark gray text is for contrast ratios for the new WCAG AA standards. So that's one of the reasons they made that change as well. But like I said, this was somewhat of a forced upgrade. We decided they were going to make us change in fall anyway, and we decided, well, let's just kind of dictate our own timeline and do it. And so we did it over the summer, and the net result was that we have Daylight now. So the question is there a study that shows what percentage of students use mobile devices? D2L actually provides those statistics, and it's not that many yet. But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it just was a terrible experience on mobile. So you go to the D2L on the mobile interface once, you're like, well, I'm not going to do that again. And so the statistics were really low for that. I suspect that after this academic year, if we look at mobile access to D2L, it will probably quadruple, if not more, just because it is actually usable now. Even if you went to it on a mobile device, you really couldn't do anything. And so it didn't make much sense to do that. So that's kind of where that went on. So some of this is kind of past stuff, so I'm going to skip through a lot of different things here. Probably the most visual change here that many of you noticed was the switch of the My Courses tool. So it used to be that you had this hierarchy of courses that were broken down by semester, or if you had many courses, I'm looking at Carol again. Once you get past 100 courses, then you had to switch to what we call the admin interface, where you had to search through them and it shows your last 10 access. So basically what D2L came up with is kind of an amalgamation of both of these. And so what you see now are the last 12 courses, either by access, or you can pin them, or by enrollment. There's kind of an algorithm that determines what courses you see here. I just tell everybody to pin their courses, and is the ones that you want to access most frequently. It works pretty well that way. And so that is probably the biggest change. I think most people have gotten used to it now, even though it's not been rolled out for fall yet. But that's probably the biggest change that we see here. We are experimenting. D2L, again, based on user feedback, has added some enhancements to it. They actually accidentally got turned on. So we'll probably turn them back on slowly as we go through the semester. But one of the things is you can sort them by term again. So we'll probably turn that back on very shortly here. But all of our documentation is designed around this right now. So we want to get through startup of the semester and not confuse anybody. And then probably in midterm or so, we'll turn that feature on. I don't think it's going to really confuse anybody, but just for the sake of consistency. So we'll put that back on. That should be back now. Yeah, because so one of the things that happened, so the question was those little, it's hard to see on my screen, but it's actually orange little box. That's the activity for the course. And so one of the things we did was like, well, let's just let instructors customize this widget. So if they want to see the activities for the course, they can. If they want to see the term for the course or sort of that way, great. I wasn't involved with that meeting. I was out of the office when they had that, and I probably would have raised some alarms like, well, I'm not sure that widget is a personal widget. I think that might change for everybody. And that's what happened. So when I change it, then everybody else sees what I want to see, and then someone's like, oh, I don't like that. I want to switch it back. Why does this keep changing? So if every user in the system was changing it, customizing it as they want, and there's only one setting that applies to everybody. So we disabled that for all the instructors and just actually made it for the central admin to be able to change that now. So it should look like it did when we rolled it out initially now. In fact, we can go back there in a little bit and look at that too. One of the things we changed were the navigation tools inside of D2L, including the widgets. If you recall, our previous iteration of D2L was very widget heavy. That presented a couple of different problems. One, in terms of navigating that interface for accessibility tools is really tough because those widgets are kind of all over the place and they had to jump around. If you've ever heard someone use a screen navigator that's talking about the navigation of the page when they're using it, it took like 10 minutes to navigate a course homepage in D2L, and you hope that your link is at the top, because if it's at the bottom, it has to read through like 9 minutes of links just to get there. So it was really terrible. The other thing was in terms of updating those widgets. Every time you copy a course, and we kind of went through this a little bit earlier, it makes a copy of those widgets too. So when we were updating documentation and links and things like that, there was no master link that automatically propagated that out to all courses. It was an individual copy in each course. So if we wanted to change a link to like the online student orientation or the online student handbook, everybody had a copy of that. So we really couldn't do that. So we had to put a redirect on our server to do it that way. So that was a problem too. So we decided, well, a lot of these resources are things that we need to control. So why don't we just move some of those up into the navigation area? So if you haven't noticed already, there is a new help menu on the nav bar. It's the very last link. If you're looking at it from the instructor mode, it's actually the link in between edit course and resources. And that has links to those static resources that used to be in those widgets. So we removed a lot of the widgets off the page. I think it cleaned it up a little bit, and it provides easy access to those links. The other benefit is if we need to change those links, we can change them in one place in D2L, and it automatically propagates out to all of the courses. So it makes it a little bit easier to manage that way as well. And yeah, I kind of talked through all of that already. So again, this was kind of the old interface, very widget heavy. We had 4 standard widgets and a bunch of other widgets that you could add to that. It got very content heavy very quickly, and in students and users that were getting into D2L the first time, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So we decided to try to simplify that a little bit. So that's where we came up with the 3 widgets: the Getting Started widget, the Course Info widget, and the News widget. You can always add your own widgets to this as well. They all need to appear below the News widget, though. That's kind of how that works. So if you do want to add your own custom widget, that's kind of how you can do that. And I do have a preview of what it looks like on mobile interfaces now. So one of the reasons we changed that order a little bit is just to kind of have that proper orientation. We used to have that 2-column layout. When we did that, it was like it was the Getting Started widget, and on my course I had like a help widget, and then it was the calendar widget and resources widget and so forth. When you went to the mobile interface, all of those were on the top, and then all those second, more prominent content items were all on the bottom. So to see the things that were specific to the course, like most of us use the news item to say, hey, here's what's going on this week, they'd have to swipe all the way down on their phone to see that. And so that's one of the other reasons we reduced the number of widgets on that page, just to perform better on that. And we don't need to go through rollout since it's already here. And that's pretty much that for it. Any questions about that? Pretty much everything else in D2L stayed the same. The layout changed a little bit. The visual change was there, but the functionality is pretty much all in the same location, so nothing much changed in that regard. So any questions on D2L Daylight? And many of us have been using it for quite a while, so we're kind of used to it now. I'm still getting used to the large font sizes, but we'll carry on from there. So let me move to my next one here. This won't take nearly as long. Maybe, there we go. So I just want to give you an update of what e-resources are available to you as instructors. When I talk about e-resources, I'm talking about two primary things. And so the first one are e-materials. So e-materials are simply those materials that the publishers make available to support the text that you're using. In the past, way back in the past, how you basically got those was the publisher gave you a zip file of all of these things. You would bring it to your course, unzip it, kind of figure out which ones I want to use and so forth. And it was directly within your course. The next evolution of that was what we call these access codes. And so they had an external website. They wanted to maintain control over that copyrighted material. So they sucked it all out of the courses, put it on their websites, and then required students to type in an access code and create an account in order to get access to that. So that was kind of how we operated for the past like 5 years. But that can present a number of different problems. Especially if students are buying used textbooks, that can be a little bit difficult to get those access codes. The students are having to go through and create yet another account, and if you look at student feedback, that's one of their top complaints is I have like 50 accounts I have to memorize in order to get into anything, including D2L, but I will note that in the very near future, students will be able to log in, and you guys too, will be able to log into D2L with your USD credentials, so that's coming on board very quickly here. We're waiting for the Banner rollout to finish for that. That tool is actually ready to go. We're just going to wait for Banner to finish for that. So cheer for Banner finishing not too late now or ever. So that is coming. But again, it's another burden for students. I have to remember this user and password. I get outside of the environment, and that's kind of not fun. Well, publishers recognize that too, and so they started doing integrations. And so you could actually put a link inside of your D2L shell that would automatically forward the students to that. They didn't have to type in a username or password. And with the new content sharing standards that we have, you can actually start pulling information from there as well. So if you're grading if you're using like a publisher website and you're doing grades in there, those grades can pull into D2L now as well. The challenge with that is that everybody wanted integration for this or that, and RISC was getting requests from all over the place. And we have to have agreements in place to cover this because of FERPA, because of data storage, student privacy, things like that. And so we just kind of took a step back. It's like, okay, we need to kind of take a strategic approach to this. And so at the Board of Regents level, we formed the e-materials committee. And so what we set forth to do is work with all of the major publishers and get a Board of Regents agreement in place with them that would cover all of the institutions so that the individual institutions wouldn't have to sign those agreements. When we started this, though, every single publisher we asked is like, well, what's your e-text delivery platform? We're like, what? What? We're not talking about e-text here. We're just talking about e-materials. Well, they were making a huge push for e-text, and I'll talk about some of the reasons behind that in a little bit. So we decided, okay, well, we need to tackle this problem first. And so a few years ago, I'll talk about e-text here. A few years ago, we started this. I have a timeline I'll share with you a little bit. So what's an e-text? Well, it's not to be confused with e-books, like what you can check out from the library, what you can download from Amazon. E-texts are a little bit different beast, but basically they're the electronic version of the publisher's textbook. They are making a huge push for this for a lot of financial reasons, and I'll talk about some of those. Primarily is because of direct access. That's how they pay for that. So students pay for the textbook as part of the tuition and fees. So basically that guarantees a money source for the publisher. So even though e-texts tend to be cheaper, it's all built into the students' fees. So they can't opt out of that easily to do that. So that's kind of why they went down that route. So they wanted kind of that constant revenue stream. They wanted to effectively kill off the used book network. So that's why we have e-text, because you can't sell an e-text. And so that's what they were doing. So we're like, okay, fine, we'll go through this. We had done this a number of years ago with two companies called CourseLoad and CourseSmart, if any of you remember that. And the net result wasn't terribly positive, so we're just like, yeah, if you want to do it, we'll help you out with it, but we're not going to promote this. We took a different approach, though. The company, I think it was, VitalSource was called CourseSmart. I never remember which one. It evolved into the company called VitalSource. The long story short is we did a pilot on this. It seemed to work fairly well, and so we selected VitalSource as our e-text delivery. So if you want to provide your students an option to have an e-text instead of the traditional textbook, we can do that. We can deliver it through VitalSource. And some of the primary benefits to students, I think I go into this on the next slide. So why would we want to do this for students? Well, again, the book itself then becomes about 40 to 50% cheaper than a traditional textbook. We can give them first day access, guaranteed that they'll have access to the book. How many times have you ordered a book from the bookstore and they've run out of stock, or they've not ordered enough, and you're still scrambling 2 weeks into the semester to get students books? I think we've all gone through that. I went through that so much I decided to stop using a textbook in my course because of that. Well, now it's part of the integration inside of D2L. So when the student clicks on that, they have access to the textbook. They don't have to buy it. They don't have to worry about that. It's all integrated into your course. So it's pretty slick that way. There's obviously some inherent advantages to using a digital text versus a printed text. We can build interactive content into it. We can build self-assessments into it. So there's some benefits there. With VitalSource, students can actually keep the e-text indefinitely. That's one of the reasons we selected this platform over the other platform we reviewed, is that that's one of the concerns students have. Well, okay, well, I have an e-text. It expires after 180 days. Then I have nothing after that. I've basically rented the textbook. So now they actually can keep the e-text. It's part of their repository now. So that's nice. For instructors, VitalSource specifically provides a lot of detailed analytics of how the students are using the e-text. And we can go into that with you individually if you're interested in seeing that. You can see what your students are reading, what they're not reading, what they're interacting with, what they're spending the most time on. So for me, as an instructor, that's kind of interesting, because then I can see, oh, well, they're spending a lot of time reading this page about this particular topic. So maybe I need to do a deeper dive into that, because maybe the reason they're spending so much time is they're having a hard time understanding it. So it does some interesting things there. You would need, so the question was what books are available through VitalSource. It's through the publishers, actually. So if your publisher provides e-text, they use VitalSource to deliver that e-text. That's how that works. VitalSource doesn't do any of the publication. They just kind of house and deliver it. So that was another advantage of VitalSource, was that they work with all of the publishers. It presents a common interface to students. So publishers first tried to do this on their own. Pearson had an interface, and Cengage had an interface. And so you're trying to train students on how to use all these different interfaces, all look different and so forth. We didn't want to do that. And so VitalSource provides a consistent common interface for students. They have mobile apps, they have downloadable options, and so it works really well. Yeah, question? So the question is, can you require the students read the book before they complete an assessment? We don't offer deep integration into VitalSource yet, so we can't see what they've read in there. So we can't really tell D2L that don't release this until they've read this. So we can't quite do that yet. But like I said, the integration technologies are getting much deeper, so that we are able to start sending those types of analytics back and forth to D2L. And D2L is a little bit behind on that, unfortunately. But eventually they will get to the point where you'll be able to get that reporting out of it as well. So we've had some questions on, here's the timeline just in case you're really curious. We've been working on this for quite a while. We formed this committee in 2015, and we had our first full semester in 2018, so 2018 spring. So it took us a while to get to that point, get through all those agreements. The crazy thing about this was that it was like working with the publishers. It was like this is the first time they've ever had to do this with any institution in the United States. And we're like, clearly we're not the front runners on this. There are other institutions that have done this, but each one of them treated like, we've never done this type of agreement before. We've never had to remove this verbiage. They actually had click-through agreements for students that were against state law. And they're like, we've never had anybody complain about that before. It's like, we're not the only state that requires that, though. So that's one of the reasons it took so long to deal with that. I just wanted to give you a rundown of what publishers we do have agreements with. So this means a couple different things. If your book, not every book has this, but if your book has an e-text, we can deliver it through VitalSource from any of these publishers. If they have e-materials, we can provide single sign-on access to students for these publishers. And this is pretty much the major publishers here. We have 6 now, 7 now. So if your publisher is not there, let us know. We bring it to the committee, and they see if other institutions are interested in that. If we have more than 2 institutions, then we do a system agreement and get that into place. So what I did with Pearson last week was actually so the question was, did you do this last week with Pearson? Probably. Yeah. So if you're working with your publisher already for an e-text or for e-materials, that's how it's being delivered. Yep. We started with Pearson because we've had a longer-term agreement with Pearson through the MyLabs tools, through math and so forth, and then we just kind of worked our way through the list of that. And so So we're pretty happy with the number that we have now, because this is pretty much the major publishers in higher education. So there's a lot of little smaller ones, like Elsevier is one that we haven't really worked with a whole lot. So that's still in progress, and some others too. But so if you are using a text and your publisher is not interested here and you're interested in doing that integration, let us know. Again, what we do is we send it to the committee. The committee says, are there any other institutions interested in using this publisher? If so, then we do a system agreement with them. Otherwise, the institution has to do it, and it's a lot slower, unfortunately, now. So, in terms of adopting e-materials or adopting e-text for your course, or adopting both, the first step is always to contact your publisher just to make sure something's available. Just because we have an integration with the publisher doesn't mean that your book will work with it. So not every book has these things available. I'm not going to go through all of these steps, but I do have in the slides on how to set up these integrations. So when you do get to that point, you can go through that. All of the publishers, for the most part, have been working with faculty to do this for them anyway. So I know Cengage has been doing it. McGraw-Hill's been doing it, and Pearson's been doing it. I don't know about some of the other vendors, but regardless, if you do have this, we can assist you with this as well. It's a one-time setup, and then it just works, and you don't have to worry about it. The other interesting thing about some of the vendors is that they allow deep integrations into their materials. So instead of just linking to kind of a front page for them, then the students kind of have to navigate where to get that content. I can link directly to Chapter 3, Quiz 1, and I can do that right from my D2L. And when I click on that in D2L, it is going to register that as a click as well, so I can track it that way as well. So if the publisher does have that, they can do that. And the e-text is kind of the same thing. Again, most of the publisher books have e-text now, because that's what they're pushing. That's really what they want you to do. So your first step is contact the publisher, and then make sure you contact the bookstore so they know you're using an e-text, so they're not going to order physical text for that course. Students can still opt out of using an e-text if they want to use a physical text, and there's a process for doing that. So we can't require them to use e-text, but if we make it available to them, that's generally how it works. It's integrated into D2L. I give you instructions there. The other thing that you need to do for the bookstore is to tell them what the URL for your course is, because there is a link that actually gets sent to VitalSource that they need to have, so they know it's coming from that course, and that's the textbook that is used. I give you some instructions on how to do that. The bookstore is supposed to help you with this. They've not been that great about this. And just as a side note, we are doing a bookstore RFP. And so that's one thing I noted as well in our RFP process, that we haven't got a lot of support from the bookstore on doing this yet. So that is one thing that you have to tell them, because they won't know that your course is clicking into there and this is the e-text they need to deliver. So I do warn you that if you are mapping sections together, do that first, because it actually changes the URL when they map them together. So that's noted on there as well. I had 2 questions here. Chat, go ahead.
Yeah. So I use quizzes and response lockdown browsers to answer for the questions. So
Yep.
Answers. Now, if they have e-textbooks, what do we do?
So the question is, so he uses quizzes in the lockdown browser, and the question is, well, if they have e-textbooks, what can they do? Well, I don't think it's any different than open book quizzes. So they could have an open book, they could put it up on their phone, they put it up on their tablet, they could bring it up on a different computer. You have to have 2 devices if you're doing open book there, or they can print it off. That was the other nice thing about, it's a little different from publisher to publisher, but I think usually you can print off like about 100 pages of a text. So if you want to print off things, you can do it that way too. Each publisher is a little different, and that's one of the frustrating things dealing with them. The nice thing about VitalSource, you won't believe what the other books delivery platform was, RedShelf. They required you to print off page numbers. So you can just say print off chapter 2. The student would have to figure out, okay, what page number is chapter 2, and then I have to print off these. It was just a nightmare. So VitalSource is nice. Yes. Oh, sorry. Fair. E-text is part of the first day access is just what we call it internally. So it just means that we can deliver that student the e-text on the first day of class. They don't have to go to the bookstore to buy it. They don't have to wait in line or do anything like that. They click on a link in the course. The e-text is available to them. In fact, Board of Regents guidelines allow us to open up our course up to 30 days in advance. So if you've already set this up with the bookstore and with VitalSource, the student clicks on that link 2 weeks out, they have access to the textbook already. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question is, if I'm using it as an e-text option now, next semester, can I do that as first day access for the entire course? Is that what you're saying? Yep. And again, you can do it both ways too. You can say some students might opt in to use the e-text because I'm going to save about 50%. These margins aren't really that great yet. As soon as we get higher adoptions, the publishers will give us steeper discounts, and so there's some incentive for us to grow this a little bit. But we're not really driving this by, obviously we want to save the students money, and that's kind of the one thing that's really driving this as well. But we're not trying to do it because the publishers benefit from that, is what I'm saying. So we're not saying you have to do this because this is going to benefit your students. We'd like to, just because I think if we get to that critical mass, we'll start getting those down to 40%, 30%, a lot cheaper than what the original textbook is. But that is where we're at right now. How am I doing on time? Okay, so I got 15 more though. That's the last slide for that. And let's move on to my next topic here. This one won't take too long, and then I'll save the deep dive for Monitor here in a minute. So it feels kind of awkward talking about this while we're using Collaborate Ultra, but we're going to make Collaborate Ultra go away. So I'm going to talk about Zoom web conferencing, but it will be a good thing. I was one that was really skeptical about this. I won't mention it, but it's the other school up I-29 that was really pushing to drop Collaborate Ultra. And for the most part, we've thought it's worked really well. There's some things that it doesn't do, especially when you compare Collaborate Ultra to the old version of Collaborate, which had a lot more functionality. But the new version avoids Java, and that's a far better payoff for that. But anyway, so there was some interest by other board regents and institutions to look into web conferencing and what the alternatives were, simply because we've been using, and I note this on the screen. Oh, was there a question? I'm sorry. I'll get into that. So the question is, will the recordings be available? And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through here. So just a little bit of background. We've been using Collaborate since 2007, and that actually was called Illuminate back then. It was a separate company, and Blackboard bought them, turned it into Collaborate. So it's generally worked pretty well for us. We had some issues early on with Collaborate because it was using Java, and there's a whole security issue with that for a while, and so that created some problems. So they've moved to an entirely web-based version called Collaborate Ultra. So when I talk about Collaborate versus Collaborate Ultra, the Collaborate Ultra technically is the new version that's entirely web-based, and it's been working fairly well. So there wasn't a lot of desire for people to immediately switch unless there are some pretty good reasons to do so. And so that was my position. It's like, I think this works pretty well. I don't want to go through the transition unless there's a compelling reason to do so. And I was compelled. So I'll talk to you about that, why that's the case here. So we looked at 3 platforms. There are a whole host of vendors that do this, but we focused on 3. Obviously, we considered Blackboard Collaborate, the one that we're using. GoToMeeting was another one, and was very quickly eliminated. I won't get into that, but it just wouldn't have worked for us. Or Zoom. And Zoom is really popular. Zoom has been stealing a ton of clients from Blackboard Collaborate. So they had a lot of momentum going into this, and they did a really good job with their presentation to us as well. So ultimately, we recommended Zoom. I'll talk about why. That was approved by AAC in May. TAC has not really had a meeting to discuss this. It won't be able to until October, but we're going to get our agreement finalized for them so they can review it. We can just kind of get moving on this. And what we're hoping to do is we're working with Zoom right now. They're going to give us complete access to Zoom starting whenever we sign the agreement, and then ending somewhere in like January or potentially up to April. We're going to try to get them to push to Zoom, or to June, excuse me, to use it for free, which is nice, because if we do that, then they get a 5-year contract out of us for that. So that's what we're currently negotiating. The long story short, though, is Zoom offers basically the same exact functionality as Collaborate Ultra. But it has a number of different advantages that Collaborate Ultra just doesn't do now. Some of these are on Collaborate Ultra's roadmap. Some of them they have a roadmap like, these are the things we're working on immediately. These are things that we're thinking about. And so a lot of the things that used to be in Collaborate, the Java-based version, are still way out on their roadmap, which is just kind of surprising to me. I would think you'd want to get parity with your products really quickly, but they just didn't prioritize it that way. So some of the advantages that Zoom has over Collaborate Ultra, you can do 25 simultaneous video feeds. It looks kind of confusing when you do that because you have little videos of everybody in the screen, but it can support that if you want to go that far. For our particular demo, I think we had 8 video screens going at the same time, and there was no reduction in quality or hiccups or anything like that. One of the things is we are technically doing screen sharing right now, but we're doing it because I've uploaded the content into D2L. If I were to share the application to the full screen window, you won't necessarily see my video in there. Zoom can do that as well. It has a much more functional whiteboard. You can draw on anything. They're saved. You can go back and forth. That's something Collaborate Ultra can't do right now. So if I were to draw my whiteboard right now, in fact, I'll just do that. So if I draw on here, and maybe they've changed it and they're probably going to prove me wrong here, but so if I draw on this, I'll just draw circles there. Yeah, see, they disappear. So if I want to jump to a slide and come back and look at my annotations on there that I was working with my students on, they all disappear. So that's not terribly useful. Zoom doesn't have that problem. One of the things that really fascinated me that I think will really help us on the accessibility front is that every single session offered through Zoom gets an automated transcript generated for it. On top of that, the transcript is searchable, and if a student clicks on an instance where for example, I'm talking about the 12-bar blues, they click on that, it jumps immediately to that point in the lecture. So if I'm talking about different topics in my course and the student wants to go back and review that, they can just type in the keyword, find it where I mentioned it, click on it, and it'll jump right to that point in the lecture, which is really powerful, I think. There's a HIPAA compliant version. Do we have any? Yeah, you're from health science, from nursing. There's a HIPAA compliant version of Zoom. I keep saying Collaborate Ultra. So you could use that in clinical settings if you wanted to. That's not something that we can do currently with Collaborate Ultra. So, and you're questioning, how would that work? I did the same, but supposedly they've got a way to do it. So they offer a HIPAA compliant instance. It's a separate instance of Zoom that doesn't have all the features in it. So it protects identities and does things like that. So if you're interested in that, we can deep dive into that with them and figure out how that works. But that's one of the things I'm championing for, is that it's used in healthcare a lot for conferences and things like that because they have a HIPAA compliant version of it where others don't. They have H323 integration. What does that mean? Well, that means we can actually connect this with our DDN classrooms as well. So we can host a session through Zoom. I can connect to it on my phone. Someone in Antarctica can do it on their tablet, and we can have a DDN classroom and all participate in the same session. So that's pretty slick as well. Anything that we can use to make use of that investment of DDN is a good thing. One thing I love, it seems like a minor thing, but I think many of you have encountered this as well. If you play like a YouTube video in Collaborate Ultra or play something with sound, the other people on the other end don't hear it because the audio doesn't get transferred through. That works in Zoom. So anything that I play as a moderator, the students are going to hear on the other end. And I teach jazz online, so that's a huge deal for me because right now I have a loopback device, I have a soundboard, a microphone all connected up. It looks really fancy. I can get rid of all of that now, so it's going to be really slick. Especially so when I go to conferences in October and November, I have to bring small rig with me to do this with a 2-channel soundboard and things like that to get this all to work. I can get rid of all of that now and do my sessions from there, and so it worked really well. One of the things that was interesting to the Board of Regents also was that it was $25,000 cheaper than Collaborate Ultra. And so when we sign a 5-year agreement, that's quite a bit of savings. We can do a lot of different things with that money. So that was a pretty compelling reason to switch as well. So that's kind of where we're at with that. What else do I have on here? I'm not going to go through this now, but if you're curious to see what Zoom looks like, I do have a demo link in here. This is them presenting their tool to us and trying to sell us on it. So you can see the exact same session that we saw there. And implementation plan. So this is getting to the question here. So again, we're currently working on Zoom to figure out the exact details of this. Likely we'll do some sort of small pilot in fall. If you're interested in participating in that, let us know. We want to kind of keep it small, though. I don't have any concerns about Zoom not working. It's just I want to keep the pilot small so we can manage that effectively. We'll probably do an expanded pilot in 2019 spring. And all courses moving forward from 2019 summer forward will have to use Zoom. So we'll have to make sure that those summer faculty are ready for that. Because our contract with Collaborate ends on the 30th of June of 2019. So we will turn it off at that point. One thing we're still trying to figure out, we own all of the recordings that are in Collaborate Ultra. What we have to figure out yet is, do we have to retrieve all of those by the end of June, or do we have some sort of grace period after the contract ends to be able to retrieve all those? Technically, those are Board of Regents properties. Well, technically they're yours, but the Board of Regents is acting on your behalf to retrieve those. So we will see that. But if you're really concerned about that, I would encourage you, once we start getting rolling with Zoom, to start pulling down those recordings and hosting them elsewhere. Either save them in your course, preferably using Panopto or something else, throw them on YouTube, anything like that. We will obviously have more details on that migration plan as we get closer to that. So any questions about Zoom or Collaborate Ultra? Yes? Yes. Sure.
And you get this massive file. I know Angela was talking about the E2L Windows of blank big files. So is there any kind of an online management system for this?
Sure. So the question was, so I record this session in Zoom and I download the file and I have this big file. What do I do with that? How do I get it to my students effectively? Well, the first thing is that, as you can see, you don't actually have to download the file. You get a link to it and it will have a Board of Regents URL in there. And you can just post that link into your course and students can access it that way. If you want to edit that or do anything with that, you can bring it into Panopto and deliver it out of Panopto as well. You can throw it up on YouTube if you wanted to. We tend to prefer Panopto because it stays hosted. Well, it's not, I shouldn't say it stays hosted locally. Everything's in the cloud. It's all in the same place anyway. But we have more control over Panopto than we do have on YouTube. So, other questions? How much time do I have left, Angela? Okay, so I'm going to fly through my last one really quick. The next thing I want to talk about is Respondus Monitor. And we've already talked a little bit about Lockdown Browser and some of the conversations that we've had here. And Respondus Monitor is an add-on to that. It's a remote proctoring solution. So what does that mean? Well, let's kind of dig into this here. I don't mean to scare you. I have 31 slides. This is a presentation I'm going to be giving to South Dakota School of Mines, their Provost Council, because they want to start adopting this for their system. So I'm going to be going up and doing that. So this is a much broader presentation I'm giving to them. So I'm going to skip around a lot. But again, all the slides are available. Yes. Sure.
So typically with a proctor, you have to, if you're so many miles away from a Board of Regents testing center, you can use a proctor.
Right.
Is it the same with Respondus Monitor?
So the question is, if I'm outside of a certain radius of a testing center, a university center, I have to use, I'm required to use a remote proctor. Otherwise, if I'm within that circle, I have to use a university proctor. That's only if you're using live proctors. There's not that restriction with Monitor. There can be, though, and so that's something we can talk about, too. With Monitor, you can either, you have a lot of flexibility with the tool. You can just require that students use Monitor or a proctor, so you can give them the choice, which works really well for kind of, it segues nicely into that question here. It's like, generally for rural students in South Dakota, it can be kind of difficult to find a proctor because, especially in your small town South Dakota, technically you're not supposed to have a relationship with the proctor. Try doing that in small town South Dakota. You know everybody. I mean, everybody knows everybody in South Dakota, which is just crazy. So I go all over the world. I find people from South Dakota. It's like, oh yeah. Anyway, so that's what this is getting at. So I didn't see what the question was.
There is now Lockdown Browser advanced options and exams. The iPad version of Lockdown Browser now work with USC E12. In other words, could I now turn on and allow students to use Lockdown Browser on an iPad device?
We're not currently recommending that. We still need to do some more working on that. They just enabled it for SDSU. And they're kind of playing around with it, so we'll see how it works out for them, but we'll do that. So leave it off for now. But that is going to be an option, though, to do that. So I'll get into kind of the different ways you can manage Monitor, but one of the things is you can do either or. So they either use Monitor or they use a live proctor. Or what we're actually working on anatomy and physiology course. We're requiring them to use Monitor and a proctor, which sounds kind of crazy, but we've had some proctor issues, not surprisingly. So proctors aren't infallible. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So that's going to require the proctor to identify him or herself as well as the student goes through and takes the exam. So
there's no USD policy currently, so a student could sit over in the dorm on USD campus.
Yep, I had that happen this semester. I had a residential student. I could tell he was in the library taking his exam, so because I can see the background there. So. Yep. So that's the convenience factor, is because we as instructors tend to have our exams at the same time, midterm and final. Well, our testing center only has X number of seats that they can put people into. And so we all test at that same time, and it's really hard for students to do that, even if they're on campus. And so having the ability to go and do that is really flexible. Yeah?
Is the response monitor only available if the exams are administered to D12, or is it possible with software like the Pearson by accounting that?
Monitor is only, so the question is Monitor available for any other platforms? It is only available in D12 right now. Actually, Pearson has what they call the lockdown browser, and I always thought it was confusingly named because it's the same as the name as the Respondus browser. They actually do license the lockdown browser from Respondus, and they call it the Pearson lockdown browser. We've asked them to look into incorporating Monitor into that tool as well, but that's entirely up to Pearson. So if they're going to offer that as a solution. So kind of segueing to some of that conversation that we had here, this is kind of the factor that we run into in South Dakota. Small town people trying to find a proctor in their area, it's hard to do that. And that was actually a comment from the Volant about the students noticed when Monitor became available, even though we weren't using that. So what are some problems with proctors? Well, like I said, small towns, it can be hard to find a proctor that you don't have a relationship. If multiple people from that town, we have a lot of dual credit students from high schools in those towns taking exams. Scheduling that proctor to be available at those times can be difficult as well. Conversely, students in large cities can find it hard. They're just, where am I going to find a proctor? Who can do proctoring things here? Involves scheduling and travel, and oftentimes in bigger cities, if they're going to do a proctor, it actually involves a cost to that student as well, which is not something that we always publish, and so students get frustrated. We have to pay $50 to go get my exam proctored. That wasn't on the syllabus. Well, unfortunately, we don't know how much those proctors are going to charge all the time. So as I mentioned before, proctors or instructors tend to schedule exams at the same time. That puts a strain on our proctor resources as well, so that's an issue. Especially students studying abroad. We were doing a Monitor pilot, and one of the instructors was panicking because their student couldn't find a proctor. They were in the jungle, literally in the jungle in Mexico, and couldn't find a proctor. And they had internet access, though. So, let's do it through Monitor. Okay, and we did it through Monitor, and it worked out well. So that's that convenience factor here. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to skip through a couple things here. Don't need to worry about this. I have a video you can watch if you're not familiar with what Monitor is. It will give you a kind of a 50,000-foot view there. One of the things that gets forgotten about Monitor, though, is that part of what we're doing this for is identity verification. Is the student taking the exam who really is that student? We even run into problems with this with proctors. Proctors aren't really good at spotting fake IDs. So one of the things we're working on is Monitor has the ability to take a student photo ID from the photos that we have on campus in the big database, and then they take a picture of themselves so we can kind of look at that as well. That's not available yet, but we're actively working on that as well. But basically what Monitor does is when the student's taking an exam, they have to have a video camera and a microphone, and those are on while they're taking the exam. And so they're recorded in that environment to do that. It's not meant to prevent all proctor, all cheating. If you're going to cheat, you're going to find a way to do it. I'll show you an example of what happened in my class this semester. But Monitor can help you out, prevent that. They put a big push on, it's a deterrent to academic dishonesty. It kind of levels the playing field. Everybody's taking the exam the exact same way. They know they're being recorded. So just hopefully by the process of Big Brother watching them, they'll be less inclined to cheat. Doesn't always work, but it's another tool here. The reason we went with Monitor is because it was already baked into the lockdown browser. Students started noticing this. Hey, there's a webcam here. What's this doing? Is it secretly filming these? Like, do you have a webcam? No. Then it's not going to film you while you do that. That's what prompted the Volant article. Is they started rolling that out. We didn't even have a license for Monitor, and students were panicking about that as well. So the nice thing about that, though, is if you're already using the lockdown browser, there's nothing for the students to do. It's already baked into the client that they're using. They just have to make sure they have a webcam and a microphone. I go into some of the cost breakdown if you're really interested why we selected this. It was much more affordable than the other options. And it was a good opportunity to kind of get started in this. And if it didn't work out, then we could always look at the more expensive options. So again, the goal of Monitor is to be a resource to deter academic dishonesty. And I give you some different scenarios of what to look for there. Monitor can help us out with that. The idea, though, is we're not wanting you to watch all of the video footage that it takes. So what it tries to do is it tries to analyze the student session and give you some guidance as to maybe these are sessions you should take a look at. And it has a number of different algorithms that it does. So this is a sample student session. So if I'm looking at this in the instructor, there's a view prior to this. I'll show you just a second that would prompt me to look at this. But those red areas in there are where I'm going to click on and see what's going on. The student's not in the frame. You can see it takes screenshots. Students missing from the frame. Where did they go? Are they talking to somebody in the background? It's listening for that. Does it see somebody else in the background? It's looking for that as well, and it kind of does all this analysis. The one thing, if you're interested in using Monitor, we can get with you and kind of come up with some of the strategies on how to manage this. The one thing I would choose, though, is if you're going to look at anybody's footage, check out the pre-exam footage, and I'll show you why here in just a minute. And unfortunately, because of limitations in Collaborate Ultra, the people on the remote end aren't going to be able to hear the video, but I do have captioning, so you'll be able to see that. Again, it's already baked into D2L. So you access it through that Respondus Lockdown Monitor. You'll see a list of your quizzes here, or exams. Do you ever see this button here after you've copied your course from one semester to the next? Just click on that little Fix It button, and that reassociates that link with there. And then when you go into the dashboard, this is also where you configure the lockdown browser. So for any exam, you can say, don't use any of these tools, which is the default. Just require the lockdown browser. Only require Monitor, so you can't do anything else. Monitor or a Proctor, and this new solution that we're coming up with, Monitor and a Proctor, because we've had some Proctor issues in our anatomy and physiology course. There is. You can put a password in Monitor as well. Now, the idea is that if you're just using Monitor by itself, you're not going to use a password. But if you're using Monitor and a Proctor, then you're going to need that password, and that's how they get into that. So, but that same password is the same one they would use for the lockdown browser. So if you're doing it that way, or for proctoring as well, that's where it kind of comes into play here. I'll show you that in just a second. So it's kind of hard to see these screens in here, but we can walk you through here. I try to take you through some of the steps here. Oh, what's the other one I want to check in on? Oh, just quickly, you can configure the startup steps here that students have to do. I usually check them all. One is a webcam check just to make sure the camera's working, so it records like a 30-second clip of them. They're required to show their photo ID, so usually university ID or driver's license. They have to take a still shot of their face. Again, we're working on getting student IDs, pictures integrated into this, so you'll have that to compare as well. So then after all of this happens, the students take the exam. Again, I want to stress, we're not wanting you to review all of the footage. There are tools in Monitor that will help you kind of look for that. But generally how I caught the cheating last semester in this was not using Monitor. I caught it in Monitor, and that's how I was basically able to find the evidence. But I was looking at the exam like, this student's answer is very similar to this student's answer, and they were both wrong. And so, like, okay, something's going on there. Then I looked at D2L, oh, they're taking the exam at the same time, or, you know, a very proximal time. So one would take it, then the next one would take it. And so then I watched some of the footage, and like, oh, they take it in the same place. So are they collaborating with each other? And I'll show you what happens there. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this is all machine learning, AI-based. It's not perfect. So this is an example where it flagged a situation where there are two people in the shot. So use those judiciously, but it can help out here. So this is one of the reports. This is brand new. This just came out a couple of weeks ago, so this really helps. It gives you kind of a priority review here. So typically I'm going to look at the ones that have a high priority. And it uses, I think they said 20 to 40 different considerations for calculating that, whether they're not in the screen, whether they're detecting audio issues, they're detecting internet issues, things like that. The screen goes blank. You know, they may hold something up against the camera while they get something out, and then they release it when they hide it again. It's kind of trying to detect all of that. I give you some tips on here on what you should take a look at as you're going through and reviewing these. The one thing I will say is, and students will probably become wise to this at some point, but when they do the environment check, one of the things that it has them do is after they've taken their picture, after they show their photo ID, it has them take the webcam and show it around the room just to make sure there's nothing else in the room, no one else in there. They're not using you know, illegal trails and so forth. After they do that, the camera stays on, though. And the reason that camera stays on is because then the student's going to pull the things out from underneath the couch and put it up in front of them. The friend is going to come into the room and prompt them and so forth. And that's the most common way that response monitor is catching cheating. And I can show you an example of that here. I could go to it here. Let's see if this is going to work. I'm going to have to show it here. Well, I want to preserve time, but I actually have video footage of my students collaborating with each other that was caught with Monitor. The other student sitting off the screen after the environment check, she walked into the room and they just talked about, hey, let's compare notes. Let's, the last exam was this way, so here's all the answers I got, and they were talking back and forth with each other and cheating on the exam. And so I shared that with Deborah Dodge, and her mouth dropped. It's like, wow, that was. I'm like, is this enough to go on? And she's like, yeah, we've got these students. So that is likely where it's going to catch that. The students are bringing out that material, but I have caught students and other points too. They wait till the very end of the exam. So they're thinking that, oh, well, you're only going to watch the first 5 minutes of the footage. You're not going to watch the last part of the footage. So I'm going to go through and do my entire exam. Then I'm going to pull my notes out and make sure I got all the answers correct. And so that's something I kind of check on too. So there's some different strategies on dealing with that. Talk about how they're stored. I give some tips here. That's basically, we can get with you and work with you on that. We offer an individual course and training on this, so if you want to do that, we can. I have some video resources in here that you can share with your students if you want to use this, instructor and student guides and things like that. So that's a quick run through on that. Questions? Yes.
Are all students coming into an online program they're told like right at the outset you need to have a webcam?
No. So if you're going to use Monitor, yeah. So, and I think I include, I don't know if I put it back in there. That was one of the things I was going to add to here. I have verbiage in my syllabus that mentions that, says, and in my welcome letter that says, we're going to use Monitor, requires a webcam and microphone. That's going to be helpful to you because we do collaborate sessions as well. So it's not like you're just buying it for this. You can use it for other reasons and not likely just in this course either. So I've not had any student complain about that. Most students have laptops now. Most students have that baked into that. The problems we run into, like some of the high school students are taking it using their computers in the labs, and they don't always have webcams, and so that can be a little bit tricky to deal with. But I encourage them to set this up right away. I have a practice exam that they can use right at the beginning of the semester to play around with this to make sure everything's working, and then go into that at any time, and so that kind of helps that out as well. Yes, my course is a dual credit course. When they're online students, so they're scheduling it whenever they want to come in. So the question was, do they take it at the same time or what? No, some of the dual credit students, I can tell they're taking it in the same location, and they're doing it at different times though. And so I kind of watch for that too, but generally there's someone on administration in there as well watching them, so I'm not as concerned about that, so I check those things out as well. Other questions? I know I carved into your time, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Again, we offer individual training sessions on all of these things. So if you're interested in doing this, we can meet with you one-on-one and talk about some different strategies here as well. And one of the hopes I'm hoping this happens, and this is one of the references that when we chose Monitor, it said is that they actually have their testing center staff review the footage for you. And so, or you can have a graduate student review the footage for you. So again, we're trying to be cognizant that we know that this is creating this footage, and that's one more thing as an instructor that you have to do. So I'm glad that Respondus is really trying to invest in some nice ways to, at least pare down what you should be reviewing. So we're hoping that some of those strategies can be incorporated as well here at the university. Okay.
Okay.
How it would work. So the question is, if we're going to if you're using Monitor and Proctors, yeah. So during the startup process where it actually has the student take the picture ID, we're having the Proctors stay in the same frame too. It's a workaround. I've got a request into Respondus to add an optional Proctor identification step. Works just like the student identification steps, but they're not going to have that ready for quite a while yet. So.
Okay. Eric, are you just using this to get into Google? Are you sharing the screen?
No, I have the slides uploaded in here, so you can just switch to app sharing. So just hit stop.
Okay. And that should work?
Should work.
Okay. And then just go to Google. Right? You want me to open up Firefox? Okay. Okay, that's fine. I can do that. we can do that. I'll do this one though. Okay. What I'm going to do now is just talk real briefly about Google Docs. How many people use Google Docs here? Good. We got quite a few people that are using it. So, oops. So what I'm going to do is just kind of show you how to get to your Google Docs, because everybody at university and even students have a Google account, if you did not know that. And so I can show you how to tell your students where to go and how to use that. Sorry, let me just log in here real quick. So hopefully, so actually if you go to USC, the portal, and this is where all the students can go, or yourself if you don't know that you had one. So if you just log into the portal here, and you go to the technology tab, and then under where it says technology support, Google applications right here, if you just click on this, then it will prompt you, and then you can sign up. See, I already was on there, but it will prompt you to sign in with your USD email, and it will get you hooked up to your Google account for USD. So I'm just going to go in here actually. Yep, or you could just go to docs, like Eric said, docs.usd.edu for that as well. So one of the things that I really like about using Google Docs as instructor is I put all of my syllabus, I create everything in my course that I'm going to share with my students in Google. It's really nice, it's really easy, and then that way all I have to do is create that link and post that link into my D2L shell for it, and then say your course schedule. If you have your course schedule and all of a sudden that's usually, tentatively with it. So if something changes, you can easily go right back into your course schedule, and I'll kind of show you here. I have all of my teaching courses. Bring up this. If I can find my course schedule, here's the course schedule. So say I already have this link, this is the course that I'm going to be teaching this fall. The student, it's activated, but all of a sudden I was like, oh no, I need to change something already. I can just go in and say, oh, I need to change this to Wednesday. I can go in, change it, and it automatically changes right into your D2L for it. So that's really nice, so you don't have to keep, like with a Word document, you would have to make the change, upload it, and then, download it and all that. No, that's a good question. So what happens is when you go to actually get that link for it, what you do is you go to share, and then right here anyone can view. Now one of the things that I noticed is, and Eric can elaborate a little bit more, right here it usually defaults to anyone at University of South Dakota can edit that. I typically don't choose those because not everybody will log in with their USD credentials or USD email. So I typically, if you go to more here, anyone with this link, and then you can go here, and depending on how you want to use this, if they want to comment, however you want them to do it, obviously with the syllabus or anything like that, you don't want them to. So you just say can view, save. And then right here, you just copy this link, and this is the link that you would put into D2L for them to have. One of the things that I did in this past semester that worked very, very well with using Google Docs is I taught an online course, and I liked peer review for it. So the students had a paper, and they had to peer review each other. Now, being a student, I had that too, but one of the things that kind of frustrated me as a student when I was doing it is they would, in the discussion, you would have to upload your Word document, and then they would make maybe comments on that, and then they would have to upload it, or a lot of times my comments just got stuck in the discussion thread down there, and it's like, well, where does that go with, where does that comment go within my paper? So one of the things that I had my students do is actually use Google Docs and share the link right here, but instead of this, I chose can comment on it. So then my students were able to comment on each other's doing that peer review, so they saw the comments right next to, like you normally would mark up any document with it, and it worked really, really well for it. The only thing that I would say, once again, when I did my tutorial, and I just told the students again, is just try to remember to do anyone with this link, shareable link with it. That way, in case some of the students use personal ones, they were able to access it. That was the only thing. But I got really good feedback on it. They really liked that collaboration aspect within it. And once again, I think it was a little bit more streamlined, just posting the link in the discussion and getting that direct feedback from the students right where the comments were that they had. Yeah, Mar.
How well does Word, for lack of a better word, play with Google Docs? It's like if you're copying and pasting stuff back and forth. Because
Okay.
I have requirements on how I want to see a final paper
Mm-hmm.
in a Word document with margins and things. And I'm not familiar with Google Docs.
Mhm.
I don't know how to make sure the students are able to best utilize those.
Okay, so the question was about how to format maybe Google Docs that is kind of the same as Google or Word for it. That's a really good question. Actually, it's pretty much very similar. If you just go to File and you go to Page Setup, here is where they can change the margins for it. So they can change landscapes, this. So that's where they can change the margins if you are really, like APA has certain standards for the margins and things like that for papers. Yes, yep, they sure can. Right here, this is where the headings are, and once again, I use this all the time for mine because for screen readers, that's how they read for accessibility purposes. So all of mine are set up as using title, subhead, and things like that for it. Yep. Google Docs is very similar to Word. There's a few things that are a little different, but I mean, for the most part, it's pretty streamlined. The other good thing is you can upload a Word document. So say you already have a Word document, you can go here. Let me go back into my Google site here. If you go File, Upload, you can upload this Word document into Google. Now, one of the things is a little caveat in here. Sometimes the formatting does change a little bit depending on how much, like, I would say tables and things like that. But for the most part, it does come over pretty easy. And the stuff that's the formatting that doesn't, it's pretty easy to go back and reformat with it. There's not too much variation with that at all. Let's see. The other thing that you can go in, if you ever do any type of collaboration, like I said, with my students, I can go in and track changes and stuff and see who did what when they did it. The other really awesome thing is I got a notification when one of my comments was accepted or denied, or when they asked a question about my comment. I got that because they could put it right underneath the comment section with it. So that was really neat that I was able to do that. I could see my students actually working on it and say, yep, I took in consideration that. Yep, I took in consideration that. So that was kind of a neat aspect of that as well. It came through on my email because it's connected to my USD email. So whenever I saw that a student was accepted a comment or added a question next to it, a notification popped up in my email, my USD email. So that was really nice for it. Let's see. Those are the main things. Like I said, I know we're a little over time, so I'll kind of wrap it up. But once again, if you are interested in using Google Docs in any way, let us know. We can definitely help you out with that. Do you want me to? Oh, thank you. Real quick, Eric did point out, so if students want to download something, because obviously you can't upload a Google Doc into Dropbox and D2L or anything like that, but you can have them actually go here for it, download as, and it can download as a PDF, a Word doc, and so from there, they can upload it to the Dropbox in D2L. So, and this is really nice. The other thing that's really nice, real quick plug here, is it saves automatically. You do not have to worry about losing anything, anything like that. I mean, it saves like within seconds as you're typing. It just saves. So that's a really, really nice feature, because if your computer crashes or you just keep forgetting because you're typing away and you kind of forget, it does it for you. So, yep. Yeah. So yeah, it's really nice that you don't have to worry about that as well for it. So yeah, like I said, if you have any questions, we are here. We can help you with how to use it within your course if you want to know more about that, or just use it in general for it. So
The thing
yeah.
I like about my class is that it just flows right with the browser.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter if students coming on a PC. Sorry, the thing I like about it is that it loads it just in the browser window right within my course. It doesn't matter for students accessing PC, Mac, Android tablet, iPhone. Students are going to see that document just like that. And most of the time, that's just what the students care about. They just want to see the document. They don't care what format it's in. They just want to go and look at it. But then, like Shannon showed you, you can download it in pretty much any format. If you've got a Kindle e-reader, you can download an EPUB version of those documents if you want to. The thing I really like about it is with slides. I use Google Slides for my presentations, like what I just shared with you guys. And I can download those as PowerPoints, PDFs. I can change the layout so I have slides on one column, notes on the other column, and students can control all of that. They can print right within there, and it works really well.
Here, this is kind of what Eric was saying, where it just comes up within D2L here. So they don't have, it doesn't on this one. I just said don't, just pop up within D2L. So it was able just to pop up. It did not take the student out of the D2L browser. It stayed right within D2L. It did not pop them out into the Google browser for it. So that's what Eric was saying.
One quick thing, if they want to print it off, though, you need to make sure they click on the print icon up there, and not try to print from the browser settings, because this will print a specific layout for that and deal with all of that and so forth. So that's the one thing my students were noticing. It's like, I want to print off the syllabus, but it's printing off the browser page and it looks weird and stuff. It's like, oh, so if you go on my course and look underneath my syllabus, I have a little screenshot of that and say, if you want to print this off, click on this icon within the document, and then that will print it off just like you normally would see it.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, does anybody have any questions? I know it's getting late. No? Are you okay, Angela?
Yeah, I had a question about, not the way you can just address that.
Okay. Okay, sounds. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.